Fascism is a complicated and confusing political belief system because it doesn't really have a dedicated manuscript or document that tells you exactly what it is and what it believes. Communism has the Communist Manifesto. Capitalism has things like, the Wealth of Nations or something. There is a fascist manifesto, but they don't read that. This means that there are a lot of misconceptions about what fascism is and how it works. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some of these misconceptions and how we can move past them to understand fascism a little bit better, which will go a long way to helping us prevent it from taking over the world. The first myth that I want to be talking about fascism is that fascism is socialism. This is something that you hear a lot in right-wing circles. They'll say well, the name of the Nazi Party was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, so that means that they're socialists, right? Okay, it's not nearly as simple as that, but it's not as complicated as that either. The fact is that a lot of early fascists, Mussolini, Hitler, and even more minor figures like Oswald Mosley in the United Kingdom or Leopoldo Lugones in Argentina, they started off as socialists. This is because they were part of radical revolutionary groups in the early 20th century. And radical revolutionaries in the early 20th century were usually either socialists or anarchists. Fascism emerged from these revolutionary systems, but it was not socialism. The other thing that a lot of people get confused and that makes them think that fascism might be socialist, and this is something that the Republican Party in the United States says all the time, the reason that they get confused about this is that they think that the right wing means no government spending. And that is simply not true. In fact, a long time ago, as long as back in the 1960s, the right wing wasn't anti-spending. The right wing wanted the government to spend money in order to improve people's lives. Even people like Richard Nixon, a Republican president, passed a bunch of government spending bills, some of which are essentially still in effect today. The idea that being a Republican, being conservative, means not wanting the government to spend money is pretty recent. And so the fact that the fascists did in fact want the government to spend money doesn't mean that they're socialists. The government spending money isn't necessarily socialism. That's not how that works. The other big reason that fascists aren't socialists is that fascists are pretty clear that their main enemy, their first enemy, is the left, people like socialists and communists. Remember that poem, first they came for the socialists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a socialist, and then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't say anything because I was a trade unionist. Ever asked yourself why they come for the socialists first? It's because they hate them. It's because they are their primary enemy. Fascists hate socialists. They are not socialists. Second big myth about fascism that is sort of the exact opposite is that fascism is conservatism. If you're as old as me, you will remember back when people like George W. Bush or John McCain or Mitt Romney, people like that they were being called fascists by the left, by progressives. This wasn't really an actual claim that they were fascists, at least it wasn't by anybody who knew what they were talking about. It was more like the kind of thing that you might yell at somebody at a protest, or that you might yell down the stairs when your mom tells you to go to bed because it's 11:30 and you have a test tomorrow. It's fascism as an insult, right? It's not an actual term of analysis. It's not really a claim that they're actually embodying something new, radical, revolutionary, and right-wing. Fascists instead are different from conservatives. And those are people like your Mitt Romneys, your John McCains, your Jeb Bushes, right? These people work with fascists, but they are not fascists. And there's a very, very, very big difference between conservatives and fascists. And the biggest difference is that fascists are revolutionary. Fascists want to totally reorganize the entire geopolitical system. They want to remake society entirely, sometimes in the image of some imagined past. Fascists, also different from conservatives, don't want to play by society's rules. And the biggest one of those rules is that fascists, unlike conservatives, believe that violence is good. They think that it is good to be violent. They think that it is good for people to experience violence. Conservatives, in contradistinction, think that violence might sometimes be useful. And this is why you see conservatives working with fascists, collaborating with fascists, using fascists to do dirty work that the conservatives don't want to be seen doing. But that's not exactly the same as being a fascist. So, fascism isn't socialism and fascism isn't conservatism. The third big myth that I want to talk about fascism is one that's maybe a little bit more complicated. A lot of people talk about fascism as if it were an absence of something, right? Like fascism emerges when regular society is destroyed. Everybody is, talking on their phones and like not talking to anybody anymore. That is where fascism comes from. This is simply not true. One of the reasons that we know that that's not true is that, well, fascism can't be because of like phones and, memes and internet forums, because it's from the early 20th century before we had any of that stuff. Another good reason that we know that fascism cannot come from an absence of this, civil society stuff, people working together, talking together, is from the research of extremely good professors and scholars who have proven that fascism doesn't actually appear where there is no civil society, like where people aren't talking to each other, where they're not organized in clubs and groups and hanging out and going to church and stuff. It's actually the exact opposite. Fascism historically has done the best where people are actually mingling and socializing and working together. This is exactly the opposite of what most people think about fascism. They think that it is some sort of like disease that emerges and corrupts a society from the inside and prevents people from working together and talking together. And if only they did, then there wouldn't be so much fascism. In fact, the opposite is true. Fascism is a version of society. It's just a terrifying, evil version of society. Now, this next myth, the fourth myth, is maybe gonna get me a little flack from some people. This myth is that fascism is always about white supremacy, i.e., in the Ku Klux Klan. Now, this one is complicated. If you're watching this video in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, yeah, the fascism that you're dealing with is almost certainly at least informed by white supremacism, the idea that white people are superior to other races as they are socially constructed to exist. And in other examples, like for example, the Nazi Party, of course, yes, they were white supremacists too. But not all fascism is white supremacist. In fact, consider probably the largest and most successful fascist party, certainly in the late 20th century, the RSS in India. It has millions of members, it has major paramilitary organizations, it has major successful political parties, political groups. It wants to remake the entire world in its radical revolutionary image, but it's not white supremacist, it's Hindu nationalist. Now, this isn't to say that there's a version of fascism out there that isn't in favor of the dominant way of constructing society or in the dominance of Western society. That's basically the case. Fascism is about maintaining existing power structures in some capacity, but it's not always about whiteness per se. This is also muddied by the fact that the leading fascist organizations in the United States, for example, the Proud Boys, while they're definitely embedded and fully inside a white supremacist, racist universe, they have a lot of leaders who are not white. This differentiates them very much from something like the Ku Klux Klan, which, in contradistinction, would never have a leader who wasn't white. The last myth that I have to talk about fascism, the fifth one, is one that is maybe going to be the scariest. I think that it's the scariest to me. This myth is that fascism is something that happens to a country. It's something that's imposed from above, something that happens to people, to a society. The George Orwell quote, "A boot stomping on a face forever." But that is not what fascism is. As a reminder, when I was talking about civil society, how fascism percolates from the ground up, it's something that comes from human social organization. Well, that's just the case. Fascism is a political movement. It comes about from participation. It comes about because people want to join it. Fascism is something that people participate in and build on purpose. And that is a terrifying reality if you're somebody who, like me, doesn't like fascism and doesn't want it to take over the world. It means that you have your work cut out for you. Because it's not just a matter of telling people like, hey, they're doing this to you, they're imposing this on you, this is coming from the top down. Instead, it's a bottom-up problem. It's a social organization problem. Fascism is something that lots of people like. As a reminder, every single time that fascism has taken the power over an entire nation's government, this is in Germany, in Austria, in Italy, this corresponded with serious electoral success. The Nazi Party did well in pretty fair German elections. The Austrian Fascist Party was only beaten by a different Austrian Fascist Party. The Italian Fascist Party did very well in Italian elections before it staged its own coup to take over its country. The point here being that fascism is popular. It's something that people like and want. Fascism isn't something that is forced upon people. When people think about fascism, they think about the galactic empire in like Star Wars or something. They think about mind control. They think about creepy men in robes forcing you to do things against your will. And for a lot of people, yeah, fascism forces you to do things against your will. It gives you perverse incentives to ignore human suffering or to participate in causing suffering for others. But for a lot of other people, fascism is an opportunity for them to do things, to say things, to believe things that they always wanted to do. It's an opportunity for them. It's a reflection of something they actually believe. And taking that seriously means taking fascism seriously as a real threat. I think that all too often we hide behind the idea that fascism is some kind of, thing that was imposed upon people, that if only people really knew what was happening, that they would wake up and oppose it. But that is simply not true. A lot of people in Germany, maybe about a third of the people, just liked it. They just wanted it. We have to be aware of that. We have to be thinking about that if we're going to stop it in the 21st century.